This is Sinjar in northern Iraq. The world watched in horror when Islamic State swept through here in 2014 on a campaign of genocide. Their target, members of the ancient religious minority, the Yazidis.
People on the north had a bit more time to escape, so a lot of them started to flee to Sinjar mountain.
Their fate, to risk dying of dehydration on the mountain or go down and be killed, was captured in these grainy pictures. When the Yazidis fled up this mountain, literally running for their lives, as they got more and more exhausted, they started dumping their possessions. And all the way up this road, you can still see clothing and shoes scattered by the side of the road.
For the ones who are not so fortunate, ISIS basically carried out crimes based on age and gender. The women and children were enslaved, taken into captivity sites where they were later sold, and men above the age of around 12 were executed.
9 years on, we're here to find out what's happened to the Yazidis.
We still have, up until today, over 2,600 Yazidi missing.
Even today, women and children are still being rescued and returned. Across the border in Syria, in prisons and camps, are tens of thousands of fighters and families who were living in the Islamic State caliphate before it collapsed. Some, including Australians, were involved in crimes against Yazidis, and survivors want justice. Would you be prepared to testify against them?
بس يعني إنسان تساتينا محاكمة كرنيا معاقبة كرن لازم بيعني
The invasion of Iraq 20 years ago by US, British and Australian forces sent the country into chaos and violence, creating the foundations for the barbaric Islamic State caliphate, which took tens of thousands of lives. Today, residents of Baghdad are enjoying a period of relative peace. But decades of war has left hundreds of thousands of Iraqis missing, and the government's under pressure to find them. This is the Department of Mass Graves, and inside are boxes and boxes of bones. They're carefully washed and then painstakingly pieced together.
This young person has been murdered and headshot in the skull. So this is the exit of the bullet.
Mortuary manager Dr. Mohammed Narib and his team are examining the bones of a Yazidi teenager pulled out of a mass grave.
For each grave is different number. So most of the graves around 20 to 30 cases, but we have some cases like around 50 to 60 cases. The most difficult thing that we face here is when the bones are mixed between more than two persons. So we have to separate them bone by bone.
The cases these teams work on date back decades, but it's the victims of ISIS that are taking priority.
The cold cases, for example, the Iraq-Iranian war, they were killed in the 80s. There is no families waiting to receive the victim. But here, no, there's a family waiting.
500 kilometres from Baghdad, in northern Iraq, is the Yazidi homeland Sinjar. Much of the area is still in ruins. One of the most tragic events in this genocide happened in the village of Kocho.
قندي كوچو قندكي معروف بالعايش نقالي يعني حالي واني خوش بو فلاح بون أكثر وان زراعة بو حتى دعوة دوانجي طبعا اد معروف بون.
Dr. Ilyas Saleh Qasim once lived a happy, quiet life in Kocho.
هذا وهما بالرحمين بجدير وهما با.
This was once a school ground where villagers used to celebrate those famous weddings.
Now, you see, 517 مقبرة شباب نزالنا.
Many of the graves are still empty. Their bodies are either missing or their bones are somewhere in the boxes in Baghdad.
أبراستي وقت هرش فترة كي هرشش حيفا هر سالة كي دين بيا بينجي بيرن يا شيستي بيرن أو زيدا 400 ديا ما في جارك با تحقق ما بلا خوشي فكر با جارك با مرتاح با لين مروف جار के ते खल जार के ते क्वेश्चन हम दा जारा हर जार का कहा बरीना मनूद भी बिशवला This is my mother, this is my brother, this is my brother, this is my brother, my brother, my brother, my son, daughters of my brother, son of my brother, son of my brother, my son, my wife. That is my sister.
In 2014, ISIS militants rounded up the 1,250 villagers and brought them here to the local school. They forced the women and children upstairs and put the men on trucks.
المهم برين وسا ما قوتا خوي ما بلا تعيش نقاري بشتي كموسى برين ما قولا قبل تشلم المهم برنا وين مقبراها ترمبيلا كديها يعني سيارة كدي بودا تقريبا 4 ترمبيل تقريبا 6 بيجي مروف 6 مروف هم هبون ويدركهم كل تقريبا في جيمبو تقريبا في جيمبو وجبايا كالفربو وجبايا كالفردبو الفيدري تصويره ما قرد ورأسا نقو ارمي الله أكبر الله أكبر الفيدري أمر رميت كرد هاتي دنجي هاد با جار كدي هاتي خلفان با طلقايا كدي برداي عمرو هبط القدوان البينة هذا الفيدري حتى أزيب برين دار بمدلتا قال فيدرام كد من نزاني لينكي مشكستي من نزاني قال لك الشوتي مثلا من نزاني مخو نلفان بام نويرام هكذا سبيف بام دلقش مهاد بايا مخو حركة هبايا ورأسا هاد بان يكدي المذهبان.
Over 24 hours, Dr. Ilyas crawled to safety. He was one of only 19 men from the entire village to survive the massacres. But ISIS had taken over, moving into his home and clinic.
It's my bedroom. I and my wife and Saleh. Yeah, this is my bedroom.
His youngest son, Saleh, was taken by ISIS and he's still missing.
يعني حمري 14 سال بون البام منو دايكا وين البام محردو النفس يعني شرح نجيد دلال بو. نايش بير كرن بس بابشب وكركيت كشكيت وك أفكر ابني كشك صالح برن كرنا حماية خا برنا معسكرات هالتدريبات نبخيرا وانت حل ما عندن دربان دنو وساليكر تشتكي صالح حزن زانم بري 6 سالة عائلتك شقندي ما هاتش سوري حرري يكي جوان جو من روزك صالح دي حماية مسؤولة كي داعش بول سوري راستا دروانس تشتكي ليس بري 6 سالة. يعني وقتي أزنها يعني وقتي ويد بيدم يعني أسقلك عجز براستي إيش إدي ترها ما بتربحها مو زار ويد من واحد ضيقة من واحد عيالها من بس أو قال لك لأني هريك تكتر بو دلال بو قال لك البام شوف.
The hunt for the more than 2,600 Yazidis still missing continues through people like Abdullah Shrim, known as the beekeeper of Sinjar.
بري هاتنا داعش عايشي وم الحلبة متجارة هن جفينو عن كر صالة الحلبة والرقائز عايشي وم بصورة متقطعة.
56 members of his family were abducted by ISIS. The women and children were taken and sold as slaves to fighters in Iraq and Syria.
مهن علاقات هون بوان تاجرة وقتي كسكاري مكجد السداعش ده ما اتصال بوان كرم قبل كي أم قاربين شغلك بكن خلاص بكن فان كسكاري ما جو أو إنساني هكا جغارة درباسي مناطق دي داعشتك ممكن أو كاري في شبكة كسكيدين كاري وبالفعل يا هربري برازيا مبو مروى بو ما تنسيق شكر هنجي كسجنا هاد بوش شال يسوري مروايا بريبو يعني روش جانا بينجي كس تاتا بامالا ما جنك تاتن مير تاتن طلبة مساعدة كرن نسيد وانجي خلاص بكم.
Posing as an arms dealer, he infiltrated ISIS's online markets where they traded Yazidi slaves.
ما ريكن هبون أم درباسي يوان وان مواقعات بون أما بشي درباس بون مثلا مبري أز درباس بون مسورة ديت حزام ناسف إيت هناك دمانجا إيت هناك TNT مصر موقع خون نشران متقو خوانا في تفروتني حين البام وان كتشك جيكو دورد نشران نسر موقع إنه كرينو فروتن بيت كرن أمجي درباسي مع ذات عواند بون.
And so what does this one say?
بيجي أف كتشكا حملوي يانز سالن بيجي أبوكرة يعني هي عدراية أسبهية خادمة يعني أمطيعة وبيجي أول سوماوي بيانز ده $9,000 وبيجي فوراوية أكورتا تقوم مدفيز ببينم إنه أزبكرم أشخورة كسبية عنواني خد دامي وموقعي وين دامي ما أو موقع الباخد تبتاند ومش هفالي تخورا الشان أو السروي موقعي شغلين ومسورتا ويكاش كيجي شان ويجن كيجي شان حتى ما خلصت كر.
His work came with enormous risk.
قالك جارا أم هان هادداندن إنه رسمي دمي جنيفا دهو كيش مرشان البرسيارة مدا أزل مقهاية كيرو نشتيش مرشان دن تقول نهار وقتي ما بفهم كارن طبقو جنو كان قوم قالك جارا دي بصورة وصوت إيش مرة اللي دان وتعدو زوري لوان كشكيت أصابت تشبيرا ناكم إنه كشكك حملي ويك 12 سالون كاميرا بكر اختصابت كر إنه على أساس إنه تعدل متكر أصديمت بيجم حياة عبد الله شريم وهجي كساني في شغلي بكا بقربانا هيستركا أشجافي ويكشكا كشك داتي
So far, he's rescued 399 people, but the work is getting harder.
حتى في قابي مسر حالة شغل قلق جارة قلت يا نو في قابي دعم دولي وداخلي لنا إيش خلاص كرنا وانا لأنه الناس أهل طريق الرئيس سلمى هنا قل تركيا هنا قل جندو باجاري دي سوريا هنا يعني قالك يجي البرما فرح بويا انه ام نزان بري خو بدنا كيدري بري مال سر دقه منطقه كي شغل كثير انه مزاني منطقه داعشه كسكاري ما يتيده فيغا في كدينا نيف مدنيادا ونيف خلكي دي قالك بزحمتها.
Many of the Yazidis who once lived in Sinjar, including those who've been rescued, have found refuge in Dahuk, a city in Iraq controlled by the Kurdistan Regional Government. One of those survivors is 20-year-old Sarab. She was just 11 when she was taken by ISIS and sold as a slave.
أمشونا بربجي ما باز دجبر درجة دينابو أزود خوش كتخوا عمل مالا ما تخربون هاد نقدرنش برامل القلابة كدابون يا كيجي سلقرد بومز داني بوم خوش كام هو بلنجم قردا على أساس خوش مداب دا قود داينا قو نا قو جيباب قو هرزي وما قوندوا قو تشتاقنينا قو ناترسن.
Instead, she was held captive for 5.5 years and was passed between 6 different men. When she was 13, she alleges she was given to an Australian.
غير زبرم دا ما ببينن وأشغلي مالهم كمان هرسي روجا كابني ومكرني أنا شعورها قلنا يخوش بجبر زلام تحسن كزلام خدامة جيرة زلام عبدك يعني كاريان تشبيجنتا كاريان بيجنتا تشبكا وتشناكا تكان جيب بخوي تفانا خوي كتفت خوا بشوي أنا لازم تتشتام وقود باوان يعني زلام تحسن كزلام هابي النبي واكايكا أزل باوان مام سير روجا بس بشتينجي قلت نقوم ناكر نقوم أم سبايا ناكر نقوم نافي.
She identifies her captor as Mohammed Ahmad from Melbourne, who she knew as Abu Omar. He's being held in a Syrian prison without charge and denies being a member of ISIS. Sarab's friend Taysir alleges she was later a slave to Abu Omar for more than a year. In 2019, he gave an interview to the ABC.
What about the Yazidi? Did you have like any Yazidi woman in your house?
No, I don't have any. Didn't have any Yazidis.
Who had it?
Who? My son had it.
How many Yazidi he had?
One.
Like it was 6 slaves?
No, it was more like a helper, yani. No, look, we treated her like a daughter, yani, anyway. So it's nothing, you know. It was nothing. It was nothing. We treated her like one of the family, yani.
Was she living with you in the same house?
Yes, she was.
Sarab calls Taysir so she can tell us what happened to her.
بس حسيت تسجيل كان قاتل بيجي هنقات البالك دروات كنت عامل يوانا قنشبو دباش تمام تيسير بخال باوي بنال باكوري ويبو
أنزل أبو عمر بوم وتعامل يوانا فيسبوك ما بيستقنال.
Unlike Sarab, Taysir alleges she was kept as a domestic slave and Abu Omar raped her multiple times.
إجبرت زاني وان قوي قوتيا ما تشتكينا قانوني ناكريا جام قوت تجدرا وإجبرت دين كيز
أول شيء إذا كنت كذا قاسي كجري أو قاسي باب بابين بقولنا كذا شفارة برد أول شيء يعني تعارتي هم وتشتغل بهم البارح ما جبت بيستغني.
We tracked Mohammed Ahmad down again in the Syrian prison system. He denies all these allegations and now says he never even saw his son's Yazidi slave. Sarab wants those who held her and Taysir captive to face justice.
أكيد أو تشتكي مهمة هنقا باكيد هار الدولة تكي قانونية وهينا بس هنقا يعني إنسان توسطينا محاكمة كرنيا معاقبة كرن لازم بيعني قد يزدياج بيرانا كن إجبر قالك جرائم كرن قالك تشتكرن.
Would you be prepared to testify against them?
أكيد
Not all survivors who had contact with Australians living in the ISIS caliphate are willing to go on camera. I just met with another survivor who came into contact with an Australian ISIS woman when they were in Raqqa in about 2017. She says her friend, who was 10 years old, was held by this Australian woman and her foreign fighter husband. She says she saw this woman beat this 10-year-old Yazidi girl with sandals, with sticks. She pulled her hair. She made her look after her 2 children. And she said that the Australian woman did nothing when her foreign fighter husband repeatedly raped this 10-year-old girl. In Dahuk, an NGO called Yazda is trying to get ISIS perpetrators prosecuted, no matter where those perpetrators are. They've collected testimonies from more than 2,000 Yazidis like Sarab, who were victims of ISIS crimes. Among them are allegations against Australians.
With the team, we are collecting evidence of ISIS crimes against the Yazidi community. And the overall goal is to bring them justice.
Legal Advocacy Director Natia Navruzov is part of a team helping to secure convictions in Germany.
Germany is, until today, the only country that has convicted ISIS members for committing international crimes, so genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes against the Yazidi community.
She says it's not far-fetched to think the same thing could happen in Australia.
Like Germany, Australian nationals joined ISIS, and some of them have returned or might return home. Everyone should be indicted and prosecuted based on the crimes they have committed. And I know that it's difficult for Australia since those crimes were committed far from home. But we are here, and other NGOs, including Reunited, the UN investigative team, which is documenting ISIS crimes, are available to collaborate and share the evidence as needed.
For some Yazidis, returning home will never be an option. When the ISIS caliphate fell in 2019, many Yazidi slaves ended up in Al-Hol camp in Syria. Some of those Yazidi women had been raped by their ISIS captors and had children. Children that would never be accepted by some in the Yazidi community.
These are the children of the people who kidnapped their women, who committed genocide against their men. So, there's great hatred for the men who committed these crimes, for the fathers. And sadly, that's transferred to these children who are completely innocent.
Veteran US diplomat Peter Galbraith found out that many of these women had been brought back to Iraq without their children, and some wanted their kids back. Using his connections, in 2021, he arranged for them to be reunited.
The reunion was probably the most emotional thing I've witnessed in my life. These mothers were just in tears as they, quickly identified which child was theirs, and just, fell down and hugged them. And the poor children were just bewildered. None of them knew who these women were. The oldest was not yet 5, and the youngest was 2. The youngest had been taken from her mother when the child was just hours after being born. So it was really a heart-wrenching scene.
Since then, the mothers and their children have been living in a safe house in a location we can't disclose. But it's not a long-term solution.
It was impossible for them to go back with their families or with their community because they were literally in mortal danger. One group has already been resettled to a European country, but there's still 10 children and 7 mothers who want to go to Australia.
I spoke to one of the mothers who's applied for a visa to Australia, but she didn't want to go on camera. More than 2 years ago, she applied for a visa to Australia for her, her daughter and her immediate family so they could live together safely. She says she was told today that it will be at least 6 months more before they're resettled. And she's worried that every day she has to wait, the greater the risk that someone in her community will find out her secret.
I know Australia's taken back some of the people who joined the Islamic State. I think that's fine. But surely if you're going to take back the people who joined the Islamic State, can't you reach out and move more quickly to take the victims of the Islamic State, the ones who have suffered the most?
Here in northern Iraq, amid the suffering, we've come across one Yazidi story that's truly heartwarming. Dakil Hassan is one of more than 10,000 residents in this Yazidi refugee camp near Dahuk. For 9 years, he's been mourning the loss of his wife, Samia.
خذ حياتك بزحمة يعني مدار ماسك نسأل نات فكرة مدى وهكا جاكيز بزوجه أجبر منو سامية قال كيف بدت.
A month ago, he got an extraordinary message. It was from Samia. She was alive. The ISIS family holding her in Turkey had been tracked down by authorities, and she was finally free.
دورنت كركرة داخل حتانوها يعني ضل يعني نزوجيها سكرك كيفي تورا قبل يعني من صورة كاد استخوجي رشان داقوا من ناسكي كرك كيفين كرك كيفي.
After so long apart, they've decided to marry for a second time. Their story has provided the community with hope, and hundreds have turned out for the celebration. Just weeks ago, Samia was a slave. Today, she's a bride. But their story is not yet over. They want to leave Iraq and move to Australia, where Dakil's family have been granted visas. He didn't apply because he didn't want to leave Iraq while his wife was still missing. These Yazidis have survived ISIS's genocide. But a future in their homeland is in no way guaranteed.
مخابليفا ويتشيق بتشيق كتشكد بن وكا إيشكا أخبيت بقرية لا شيء بشر تشيق بتشيق تقلص بي أمنيات عامة إنه مجتمع الدولي ودولة قالك درافي وقالك مصروف فتكن السر حيواناتك ينادر حتى محميك الطبيعي جرى شتكن جاي انقراض نبي خوزي وكا حيوانك ينادر اهتمام بيز ديا كربانا وام كربانا محميك الطبيعي جا من انقراض نبوانا مقود نبوانا شتنياي